Right, the second video of mine is one on something that people get very confused about, and that is shading. Effective shading can add simple detail to a drawing that isn't always that obvious from just simple construction lines. So you could have, similar to what we were looking at in the other one, in the other video, you could have your mug, and you've got your ellipse in the center. But how do we know that that ellipse, that bit there, is hollow? Okay, that could just be a big tube, like a big solid piece of material going down, because there is no shading on it. So we don't know that there is depth to that there is a hole in the middle of it. So shading will provide us with the opportunity to tell the person looking at our drawings that there is detail in there. If you can ensure that these techniques are ingrained into your design thinking, you will have the ability to design and produce very good and fantastic quality ideas very quickly. I'm going to go through shading of this object here, just a quick dash through the shading and how we actually do it. Now, there's two things you could be using. Ideally, you use a pencil, but you can sometimes just use a biro. Okay, you might be sitting on the train, you might be sitting in your car, on the bus, okay, and you just suddenly get an idea in your head, and all you have is a biro. Okay, so you can still use the biro to good effect. You need to make sure when you're shading that all of the tension in your arm is released, okay? You don't just shade with the wrist, okay, and keep the arm very still, okay? Your arm, the whole of your arm, has to be doing the shading, okay? So you have to be working across in simple, just diagonal motion. Okay, it's coming from the arm, not from the wrist. Okay, all the way. Simple diagonal motions. You need to make sure you only go up to the boundaries that you're supposed to be going on. You try not to go over. But also, on this first stage, you're not colouring it in. Okay, it's just simple strokes, just to make sure you get the shading. The idea with doing it in diagonal lines is that we keep the surfaces apart so we can tell when the shading has stopped. Okay. We need to make sure that when we're doing this, we also recognise that some areas have got to be darker than others. The sunlight is not just shining straight on this, such as this part here is going to be a lot darker than this part here. This part here could well be the lightest part. Okay, we're going to make that part the lightest part. This bit here is going to be the darkest. So if we go over the shading again, so we put a second layer onto it, it's going to make it a little bit darker. Put a third layer onto it, and it's darker still. This part here, obviously down here, because we've got a little bit of the shadow from this, is going to be slightly more darker than maybe the top part. So we've got a second shade, but coming up, it might get lighter. So just coming up and coming up. just to there. So we can see the tones. We can see the light tone here, we can see the dark here, and we can see the medium tone there. As I said, the tones differentiate the light. So we generally go for the light, it is one diagonal stroke. So we go over it one time. For the medium, okay, so for the not so dark places, it's two. And then for the very dark, it is go over it 3 times. Now we don't just have to use the simple diagonal line. Okay, there are different ways of actually getting that shading technique. I'm going to go through 3 different ways that I use when I'm shading in, but also that you could be using as well. So the first one is simply the pressure on the pencil. So just by not so much pressure on the pencil, we have the really light tone. By a little bit more, we have a slightly darker tone, and then a lot of pressure. So just by pressing harder, we have the darker tone. So we can see light, medium, dark. That's one way of doing it. Next one is just by the actual distances between the strokes. So when we're filling this in, we could just be, so we can see there's a lot of distance between each of the strokes on the pencil. For the medium one, we go a little bit closer together and it becomes a little bit lighter. And then if we actually colour it in, we can then see it getting darker. The final one, which is the one that I prefer doing a lot, is something called crosshatching. Now this is done with just diagonal lines. So we fill in the area with diagonal lines. So we'll go across all of these with the same diagonal system. All the same distance apart, all looking the same, all the same shade. We'll leave this one as it is. Okay, that is the lighter shade. The next one, we will go a different direction. On both of these. So you can see, slightly looking darker. Then again, we'll go over this one, the darker side, a third time with the cross-hatching. And we've got, again, a darker shade here. So we've got the light shades, the medium shades, and the darker shades. As a designer, you need to work out when you're doing this where the light is shining from. So where, when you draw your product, is the light source coming from? By doing that, you will work out where it is you've got to be shading. So if on this box here, we have a light source coming from this side up here. So the sun shining down here. Obviously, this top part here is going to be the lightest part because the sun is shining directly onto it. This part over here is going to be the darkest because there's absolutely no sun. This part here might have a tiny bit of sun onto it. So I'm going to use the cross-hatching method. So I will cross-hatch all of these sides. At the moment, it's all looking one shade. As I said, this one here is the lightest, this one here is the medium, this one here is the dark. So this one over here, I'm going to put a second layer of hatching onto it, of the crosshatch. And this one over here is going to get the same. However, this one here now, the darker side, is going to get a third layer. So we can now see, I might even put a fourth layer onto that, just to accentuate the darkness. It's completely up to you how many layers of the cross-hatching you put on, okay? So we can see the differences there, the light, the medium and the dark, all in that one part there. I'm going to be going on to marker pen shading, which is another fantastic way of doing it, but it's also a very quick way of doing it. And it's something that I would love everyone to be trying out, the marker pen shading. So that is the third part, of the tutorial that you're going to be going into. That will be in another video. Okay, thank you guys, and watch the other video.